BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Okay, hello everybody. Today is Friday, another Anything Goes Friday. Welcome to the show. This is the day when any subject is fair game. And first I would like to give a shout out to Jacob Wilbers, who suggested today's episode. And Jacob wrote in to the email, actually. Anybody can write the show at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. And he said, just a suggestion this time. Mr. Cruel, the Australian Golden State Killer, basically. And although anybody can suggest a topic for a future episode, because this was requested by one of the listeners, I'm rather new to this material, but I am definitely familiar with the Golden State Killer, Joseph D'Angelo, and I have numerous episodes about him here on this channel, so I'm going to be coming at this story with somewhat of a Golden State Killer lens, if you will, as well as, of course, a Zodiac Killer lens. Please look out for Zodiac Mondays next week. There will be something big. I mean, I was very unfamiliar with this, but Jacob Wilbers gave a source for me to get introduced to this, and it was unresolved.me, and he said, that's the best media I've ever seen on the case, so make sure to put that on your list, and if you need help with research on this or any other case, I would be happy to help. Much appreciated, Jacob Wilbers. Once again, BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. Because I was rather new to the material, I want to share the research process that I did with you guys. And one of the first sources, in addition to Unresolved, that really, this would be the second source, if you can say, it was going over to Rolling Stone Magazine Australia. And I would like to cite their article here. Let's just have a read, which will give us an introduction. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, Mr. Cruel, as dubbed by the Australian media, has clocked up 3 confirmed attacks and is the prime suspect in the abduction and murder of a 4th girl, 13-year-old Chinese-Australian Carmen Chan. Chan was taken from her home in Templestowe at knife point in 1991, and her body was found a year later in a landfill area in Thomastown with 3 bullet holes in the back of her skull. Mr. Cruel's attacks have chilling similarities. He monitored and observed the victim and their family prior to the attack. He covered his face with a balaclava at all times, and he was soft-spoken and unhurried. He bound and gagged the parents and siblings of the victims. He demanded and searched for money. He demanded his victims brush their teeth, and he used a neck brace to tie the victims to a bed following each abduction. An 11-year-old girl was attacked in 1987 while her parents were locked in a cupboard. 10-year-old Sharon Wills was abducted from her home in 1988 and released 18 hours later at Bayswater High School. And in 1990, 13-year-old Nicola Linus was taken and molested for 50 hours before released at a power substation in Kew. Victoria police have searched 30,000 homes and interviewed 27,000 suspects over the attacks, to no avail. Police believe that Mr. Cruel's victim count is up to a dozen. About this, there are 3 confirmed attacks attributed to Mr. Cruel, and they even use the term the canonical 4 crimes in many of the sources. That may sound familiar to some of you guys, but there are 4 canonical crimes. People are very much undecided about whether Carmen Chan, the person whom we read about first, was a genuine victim of Mr. Cruel. And you might have noticed one thing. She is reported to have been a murder victim, while the other 3 victims were not murdered. The first victim has had her name withheld by the media, and that was not released. But the other one was Sharon Wills and then Nicola Linus that you just heard about. They were abducted, they were abused, but then they were released. Carmen Chan was quite different because her remains weren't found until 12 months later, so she wasn't able to provide any details to the police. And I read in one source that the single biggest reason why there's still this debate about did Mr. Cruel actually commit that crime is because they couldn't get the details from Carmen Chan, whereas the other victims were able to tell the police what happened. And this is definitely going to be a case where it seems the authorities know a lot more than they reveal to the general public. They have privileged information, but I think that will be somewhat of a mystery. But why would somebody go from just abducting victims and releasing them to committing a murder and like murdering a victim by shooting her 3 times in the back of the head? And we will try to answer that question throughout the duration of the recording. But I would like to thank Rolling Stone Australia, and this was written by Poppy Reed. Though, as I was going through some of the articles, I found that I was noticing a few contradictory statements, and I would like to cite the YouTube channel Disturban, Disturban, Disturban. I had never heard of this channel before, and they have an 18-minute podcast segment on Mr. Cruel that I thought was pretty good because it shared a couple pieces of info. First, you may have noticed this graphic going across the screen of the ski mask, and sometimes it's called a balaclava, but like ski mask, I guess, is more of the term that I use. And the more famous image that you will see is one that has been modified. That was one of my first absolute takeaways from that, is that someone has gone to some effort to make sure that the holes around the eyes, and the hole around the mouth have been modified in a way in which no excessive space is left. And I thought, wow, this person must have been trying to hide something. At first I thought that maybe somebody had like a birthmark or a mole or some type of facial characteristic that they wanted to conceal. But then, thanks to this channel Disturban, that was the first place I saw that there were multiple ski masks worn. This person did not wear this type of mask every single time. In fact, there are different masks. One of them is the more conventional term of balaclava that has just the one slit where the cloth goes over the nose and then there is just one giant hole around the eyes. And if you look at this one, you will notice that there's something quite odd. At first I thought the artist had done it intentionally to cross out the eyes, but it's actually something that they believe that Mr. Cruel was wearing, and that is, there's this line that's like a visor or a screen or some type of distorting material that is blocking out his eyes. That's how he concealed his identity, but his hair was coming through. The next one was a 3-hole ski mask that has more color in it. Definitely some different shades there that you can see. And then one of them, the third one, is the most famous one. We'll say something about the color of that one in a second, but it's definitely the most horrific, the one that has the intentional modifications. And I still had to go with that initial hunch that someone might be trying to hide something. Maybe if it was a bruise or a black eye or some type of cut, stitches, because in the previous incidents, Mr. Cruel is going out with those types of areas exposed in the ski mask. And here's something that I have learned from reading up on this. Mr. Cruel never removed the mask around his victims. You heard about that, spending 50 hours with one of the victims, and they never once saw him without the mask. They saw the room that he brought them to. They were abducted and taken places. They never saw him without the mask. As I was listening to this episode from Disturban, though, they did point out something. And you're going to have to pay some real close attention because this is going to be incorrect information. Every crime that Mr. Cruel has been attributed to, or the 4 canonical crimes rather, occurred on school holidays. So people began to think that, could this be a school teacher? And I know that some of you are already formulating a response to that, thinking that, wait a second, it doesn't have to be a school teacher, right? If someone is committing crimes on school holidays. What about a cafeteria worker? What about a custodian? What about somebody who made deliveries to the school who would have had that type of information? And then there's the more skeptical response. The reason why these young victims, ages 10, 11, and 12, and 13, the reason why people this age are not in school is because they're at home. They're not in school because they're at home on a school holiday. They're in the vulnerable place because it's a school holiday. This is the time that they're not at school. So, that's just the simple answer for that. However, there is a source out there called Melbourne Marvels. That's the name of the YouTube channel. And through following that material, I mean, the guy who has done this stuff has definitely put in some good effort and done an excellent job with his research. He actually found out that the first canonical crime, which is referred to as the Lower Plenty attack because the name of the victim was not revealed to the public, as we said, that one did not occur on a school holiday. So some people still believe that because the other crimes did, then perhaps it is still one of those sayings: a school teacher, a custodian, cafeteria worker, somebody who made deliveries to the school. The theory is not completely rejected, but he really did some very, very interesting and very thorough research, especially analyzing media coverage. One more time, his YouTube channel is called Melbourne Marvels. And I also found out that there is a website that has been connected to the show, as well as a podcast that you can download on some other platforms. The website is called melbinmarvels.com, but it's spelled Melbinmarvels. Melbin Marvels. Melbin is spelled Melbin. One more time. And this is the source that really pulled me in and had me hooked. Some of his videos are a little bit lengthy, but I love to sit around and trying to absorb all of the information, even if something is an hour long. Okay, I would like to read something that he has written here on his website. Mr. Cruel is the moniker for a serial rapist and most probably murderer who terrorized Melbourne in the late 1980s and early 90s. He was never caught and punished for these crimes. There continues to be some debate as to which exactly were the crimes attributed to Mr. Cruel, but it seems that most detectives who worked on the Mr. Cruel case agree that he was responsible for at least 4 attacks in the eastern suburbs. Girls aged between 10 and 13 between 1987 and 1991 were the victims. The first attack involved a rape of an 11 or 12-year-old girl, and as we said, her name has not been revealed, while the second and third attacks involved abductions and assaults. The last attack ended in the infamous murder of Carmen Chan. However, more attacks have been attributed to him during the investigations over the years, with a total of 10 attacks having been attributed to him by journalists who have interviewed detectives about the case. These attacks stretch back to 1985 and involve home invasions and rapes of adults and children from the age of 14 and up. See, the victims are older to start out with, and they do continue on. It's really ages 14 into adulthood. And one of the absolute first comments that I noticed somebody leaving in was a question, really. Why would a perpetrator like this start out targeting older victims and then move to younger victims, like starting out with adult women or people in their late teens and then moving toward people in their early preteen years? And I think that there are 2 very specific answers to this question. The first is that there might have been some sort of indecisive nature of his sexuality. And the second one could be that he wanted to do these as thrill crimes. And to do something thrilling for him, he had to escalate the levels of deviant behavior. And just knowing that people would be more furious about targeting a 10-year-old girl versus an 18-year-old was perhaps one of the driving forces. Just looking into this, at first glance, absolutely, I was like, it was shocking to me that there are only going to be 4 crimes that are attributed to the sexual predator Mr. Cruel, because unlike the Zodiac Killer, which also has a 4 canonical crime set, some people were just I mean, why would somebody only commit 4 crimes if they're a sexually motivated perpetrator? That's what I meant to say. The Zodiac Killer has 4 canonical crimes, but the Zodiac is not a sexually motivated serial killer. Mr. Cruel was a sexually motivated criminal. So normally there's a much larger reign of terror, and you can see this if you look up any serial killer on Wikipedia who targeted victims in a sexual manner, who also raped and molested the victims. Normally they have a reign of terror of 8 years, 12 years, maybe even 13 years, like Joseph D'Angelo, but also because of the way that Mr. Cruel is going about his crimes. You would think that he is someone who is very methodical, and it's almost as if he is sharing a lot of similarities with Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer. The person whom I called cold, methodical, and calculating is an understatement with this guy. And I noticed the same things with Mr. Cruel, all of the stalking, such great lengths to cover his tracks that the average person would not think of. And the Golden State Killer was somebody who ended up being a member of an anti-burglary task force, and he's using the playbook of how to prevent crimes like burglaries against his own victims. He is betraying the law, and he is going after people whom he should be protecting. A lot of people believe that about Mr. Cruel. They think that these were crimes that were committed by a police officer, and it's been discussed on videos and in articles. People think that a police officer could have been responsible for these, and in the exact same way, he was using the playbook of how to protect people against the citizens, betraying the confidence of humanity, more or less. But the Golden State Killer was not off the hook immediately. Once he was captured, Joseph D'Angelo, there were attempts to try and link him to Australia, and they thought that he was indeed a suspect in the Mr. Cruel mystery. However, it appears that he has been eliminated, and there's a video from ABC News on online that talks about that. The authorities have looked into him, and they don't seem certain at all. They don't think there's any connection between Joseph D'Angelo and the Mr. Cruel case. However, to even put water on the idea of Mr. Cruel being some type of Golden State Killer copycat, I mean, the Golden State Killer operated from roughly 1974 to 1986 and then resurfaced again in the 90s with a couple other crimes. That's right around the time that the Mr. Cruel case is beginning. One theory that was put forward was, did this guy, Joseph D'Angelo, go from the United States to Australia periodically and commit crimes, and that's why there are so few canonical attacks linked to Mr. Cruel? The reason why I would refute that, and I didn't read this anywhere, but the reason why I would refute it is, the Golden State Killer wasn't very well known, and he definitely wasn't called the Golden State Killer. One of the reasons why Michelle McNamara wanted to put out her book that way, and she wanted to present the narrative on the Golden State Killer using that name, is because prior to this he was known as Ear, and then Ons, and then Earons, East Area Rapist, Original Night Stalker, and they put it all together, and he was known as Earons, and she wanted to call him the Golden State Killer because she thought that he just simply wasn't getting any type of media recognition. People weren't recognizing that there is a huge serial killer mystery going on, and the victims did not get justice. But the authorities looked into D'Angelo, and it doesn't appear that he was in Australia at the times of these crimes. And also, to address the elephant in the room with that type of thinking, it's almost fair to say that that's just pattern seeking. Like, some people just have this overwhelming desire to link together crimes that perhaps should not be linked together. The simplest answer is sometimes there were two different people, and this happens all the time. And the first one I thought of, what's that guy's name? Jeff Mudgett, the guy who wrote the book about how Jack the Ripper was actually the serial killer H.H. Holmes. It's the same thing, crossing a different ocean, and this serial killer continued his destructive tendencies. But I would like to go back to this article from Melbourne Marvels that says, the first case of the canonical Mr. Cruel attacks was that which occurred on the 22nd of August, 1987, in Lower Plenty. In this case, the perpetrator was wearing an open-faced ski mask, armed with a handgun and a knife, and carrying a rape kit. He broke into the house at an unknown address and tied up the parents in the household and their 6 or 7-year-old son. Sources differ about the age of this year, before raping the 11 or 12-year-old girl over a period of 2 hours. The location of the house has never been released publicly, nor has the identity of the family in question. And from listening to some other things from Melbourne Marvels, there was one story that the son was actually confined with the mother and father, but then another source that he wasn't. I don't, but those are just getting like really bogged down on some of the details. I would like to read an article that has been shared by Melbourne Marvels, and this is one of the original news clippings that was written by Greg Birchall that says police warn that armed rapist might strike again. An armed man who broke in to the eastern suburbs house and raped a 12-year-old girl after binding and gagging her parents could strike again, police have warned. Detective Sergeant Val Simpson of the Greensboro CIB said the incident last Saturday morning was similar to a series of unsolved burglary and rape attacks in the Donvale, Warrenton, Bulleen area in the December of 1985 spree. He said that because of the trauma to their daughter, the family involved in last week's attacks had wanted details of their ordeal not to be released, but they had relented when told of the danger the attacker could do if he repeated these crimes. The man went prepared for this attack, Sergeant Simpson said. He was armed with a small automatic handgun and a large knife. He broke the front window at about 4 a.m. and went straight for the main bedroom, where he bound and gagged a couple in their 30s and the 6-year-old son. He took their 12-year-old daughter to the lounge room, where he subjected her to a particularly violent rape. She suffered a great deal of trauma from the incident. And if you do look at the sketches of the man who was seen involved with this, well, he never removed the ski mask, and it has that really odd visor that goes across the eyes, just saying that one more time. But also, I was quite surprised that he is wearing what appears to be described as a tweed blazer. It's like the, almost like a suit jacket. And I think that that was just something that I did not quite expect. But some other points that we can share about Mr. Cruel is that as the canonical attacks would continue, not only did he change his appearance, using what I expect to be a different ski mask every time, he also would do things like taking trophies. He would do things like tying the victims up and then going to their kitchen to eat food. All of these things are the same as the Golden State Killer, mind you. A home invader, burglar, committing these horrible types of crimes, and then stealing people's food. It really is quite odd. And this is another thing that one of the surviving victims did say as well, that the perpetrator would take a break from the abuse and then go to the kitchen and just eat. It was, I mean, when you think about someone who was held for 50 hours, that sounds normal, but just when you read it for the first time, it is quite disturbing. The second canonical attack occurred in the early hours of the 27th of December, 1988. This time the attack occurred in the home of the Wills family at 11 Hillcrest Avenue, Ringwood. The perpetrator broke into the house and tied up the parents before abducting the 10-year-old girl, Sharon Wills, from her bedroom and taking her to a waiting vehicle. He drove Sharon to his lair, an unidentified location, where she was assaulted. He then dumped her 18 hours later at Bayswater High School. And this is the time that he wore that ski mask with the 3 holes, and it has some different colors on it. Look, what appears to be red around the eyes with a little bit of white, and neither black or blue was the main color. The third canonical attack occurred on July 3rd, 1990, when Mr. Cruel broke into the expensive rented home of the Linus family at 10 Monomeath Avenue, Canterbury. This time the parents were not home, but Nicola Linus and her sister Fiona were sleeping in their bedrooms. There's one note here. It just says that Nicola was 13 and Fiona was 15, but he went after the 13-year-old instead. That's something just to keep in mind. They were sleeping in their bedrooms. Mr. Cruel woke them up before tying Fiona to her bed and abducting Nicola. He took the family's rented car keys and stole their car before driving Nicola to Chaucer Avenue, just a few streets away. From here he bundled Nicola into his own car and drove her back to his lair. Here he assaulted her and held her captive for a period of 50 hours before dumping her body in the early hours of her 14th birthday at an electricity substation in Kew. That's spelled Kew. Now, on Melbourne Marvels, this is the place that stated that the ski mask that Mr. Cruel was wearing at the time of the Nicola Linus abduction is actually green. This is the one that has the very small eyes and the very small mouth hole. It's really just large enough for the eyeball to get around, and the mouth hole is just large enough for the teeth to show. It has definitely been modified. I don't think I've ever seen a ski mask for sale like that. But the note that has been written on it is police sketch of how Mr. Cruel looked in the Nicola Linus abduction on the 3rd of June. Notice that the image is green. The one that has been recreated everywhere else is black, which is actually incorrect. This mistake occurred because it first appeared as a black and white image in the Sunday paper on Sunday, July 8th, 1990. I mean, I really thought about this for a long time because there's another website that we'll talk about later on that said that the ski mask was actually brown. However, green, black, brown, that's all trivia. But of course, when things are printed in the newspaper, many times it's black and white, and a dark-colored ski mask, a dark green ski mask, is going to look black in the papers. And then that was just the one that has been reprinted all over the media. Moving on to the murder of Carmen Chan. Lastly, the fourth canonical crime occurred on the 13th of April 1991 in the wealthy suburb of Templestowe, where Carmen Chan and her two sisters, Carly age 9 and Karen age 7, were at home watching television. A masked man broke into the house before bundling Karen and Carly into a wardrobe and pushing a bed against it to block it. He then abducted Carmen, and she was never seen alive again. And there was a sketch that was created by one of Carmen Chan's sisters, and this one has something a little bit different. Unlike the ski mask that has the small openings around the eyes, there is something that is above it, which it really looks like a turnip or an onion even, or maybe a pumpkin if you really want to stretch your imagination, maybe a tomato. But it appears that it's almost like a bag or a scarf or a long piece of fabric that is wrapped around and then tied up at the top. But there definitely is some type of added material up there. Why would this person, Mr. Cruel, abduct these 3 victims and let them live, but then murder Carmen Chan? When people are committing thrilling crimes, it is possible that they want to increase the intensity of the thrill, and they perhaps are going to escalate the level of deviance. Alright, this guy has gotten away with rapes and abductions and abuse 3 different times. The 4th time, he committed a murder to prove that he could get away with it. It's a power-tripping idea, and I definitely think that Mr. Cruel did things like this because taking the trophies is a power-tripping move. Having the parents tied up and bound and gagged, yes, of course he doesn't want them to interrupt him, and he doesn't want them to stop him from committing the sexual assault, but it's also proving to them that he has taken over their home, and especially stealing food from refrigerators. We talked about this so much with Joseph D'Angelo. Like what the Golden State Killer would do is he particularly liked to drink beer, and he liked to eat crackers and just to sit on the back porch while the victims are still tied up. That is proving to somebody that I have taken over your home. I am now the king of your castle. You have been beaten. But another reason for him to have murdered Carmen Chan could be, and this is pure speculation, but some people think maybe she somehow exposed his face from behind the ski mask during whatever type of cover he was wearing. She pulled it off, she struggled free, or she saw something that would have revealed his identity, and he could not let her live, so he murdered her. But for canonical crimes, however, in many sources it will say that there are 3 canonical crimes, because many people simply do not believe that Carmen Chan was actually committed was actually murdered by Mr. Cruel, that it was a murder committed by him. I can see people going either way, but if the sisters did see this mass perpetrator who seems to operate in somewhat of a similar methodical way, there's a very high chance that she was genuinely murdered by Mr. Cruel. Very, very tragic. Rest in peace to Carmen Chan, and love and prayers out to the victims. But we will be right back after this quick message. However, I would like to say that there is a multi-part series on the Golden State Killer available on this channel. If you would like to hear more about a cold, methodical, and calculating serial killer, and how do people like this guy function, how do people like Mr. Cruel function, we'll share a lot more in part 2, but I would invite all of you to listen to the 6-part series on the Golden State Killer, and there's even another 7th bonus episode, which is much longer. It's called The Golden State Killer Underlying Motives. But a link has been posted here. The best way you can support this channel is just by listening to some more content. However, a big thank you to everybody who bought t-shirts, but please, feel free to just have a listen. If you like what you hear, you can share with your friends and family, share with anybody on social media who might find some interest in the true crime world, or just want to know more about humanity. Alright, well, that'll be all for this first part, so please stay tuned for part 2, and we will look at some of the psychological components that could be behind Mr. Cruel.
You are listening to Blackbox Online Radio.
This show is brought to you by TeeSpring. Feel free to check out the merchandise. Almost all sizes and colors are listed.
Blackbox Online Radio.
And remember YouTube Premium. You can download the show, take it on the go, anywhere and anyhow.
Please like and subscribe. Grazie mille.
Okay, hello everybody, and we are back. When Jacob recommended I do an episode on Mr. Cruel, I first went on YouTube, and I was looking for sources, and I saw that the YouTuber Bella Fiore had an episode out on him. And I would just say, you can watch hers if you want. I didn't make it too far into it, but I really wanted to hear what she had to say because she is a true crime YouTuber who is Australian, so I thought that perhaps she would share something a little bit more personal about this Australian true crime mystery. And I just couldn't get into her episode because I found that there were a lot of distractions in it, as well as the whole lighthearted nature of it. I tend to veer away from the true crime content that is approaching the subject in a very lighthearted way, but that's just me. I just wanted to say that that is another source that I did watch for a while. I only saw about half of her video, though. Next, I would like to give a shout-out to Sherry, who introduced me to something called the Murder Squad. At first, someone named Sherry asked me, "Are you familiar with Jensen and Holes?" And I had to think. I was like, well, Holes, who do I know named that? Well, obviously Paul Holes from the Golden State Killer mystery. And then Jensen, I was like, wait, do you mean Billy Jensen? Also from the Golden State Killer mystery. Billy Jensen worked on the miniseries All Be Gone in the Dark, as well as being the host of the show The First Degree that I talk about a lot of the time. He co-hosts that one with Jack Vanek and Alexis Linkletter. But I got on their website because they have an episode about Mr. Cruel, that is Jensen and Holes. And I would like to read this thing from the Murder Squad that has been written out here. At 4 a.m. on August 22nd, 1987, a family was sound asleep in their home. The northeastern Melbourne suburb of Lower Plenty was quiet when a man wore a black ski mask and made entry into the home. He ordered the parents onto their stomachs, telling them that he was going to take some items from the home. Taking trophies, again, a form of power tripping. And taking trophies is also about reliving the power. Like, this person can just pick up a paperweight or something that he has stolen from a family and be like, I'm reliving the memory. I'm reliving the experience. Then he tied them up. He then placed tape over their eyes, and once they were subdued, he locked them in a wardrobe. Next he concentrated on the 6-year-old little boy. He blindfolded him and gagged him. He tied him and secured him to his bed. He then trained his focus on his real target, the 11-year-old girl. The offender made her brush her teeth before and he began his assault on her. Sometime during the assault, the girl heard or saw the phone. He was threatening someone. The girl heard him tell the person on the other end of the phone to move their children or they would be next. He ended up calling the person on the other end a bozo. At another point during the attack, he stopped to make himself food, taking over the castle. When he was done assaulting the young girl, he gave her instructions. Mr. Cruel granted her permission to release her parents, but only after she counted to 100, allowing for his escape. And this is an absolutely disgusting perpetrator out there, an absolutely sick and twisted individual. I would expect that whoever Mr. Cruel is, he probably had some very harsh experience with his mother, and he perhaps did not come from a home where he felt safe. Because this is how serial killers and serial rapists and home invaders like this guy, Mr. Cruel, operate. They want people to feel powerless because they felt powerless as a child. And I quote Dr. Julie Armstrong frequently, who was the first to tell me about that. So I think that, but I said his mother because thinking of the home, the place of nurturing, and the place that is supposed to be of youth and development, he's definitely using that as a symbol, and he's also targeting girls. While I do believe that Mr. Cruel is a heterosexual male, that is also just something I would think about animosity toward his mother. And when people are rejecting gentleness, there tends to be a hatred of the mother. When people reject control, there tends to be a hatred of the father. That's just, well, I think you can get the idea there. So you have someone who is consumed with the idea of obtaining money and obtaining sex through power, but what's the true crime trinity of deviance? Money, sex, and power are the reason why people commit crimes. How is money involved? In one of the other non-canonical attacks, I mean, it's one that is allegedly, possibly connected to Mr. Cruel, he once robbed a woman for hundreds of dollars, which he even withdrew from an ATM. He extracted the PIN number and everything from her and was able to get her money out of an ATM. So this goes to show that he's even just trying to torment people, but also doing it in ways in which he could genuinely benefit from. I think it's just all of the aspects of someone who has come from a background of neglect, not feeling safe and secure. But there's also this Machiavellian component of someone who thinks that he is so smart, so powerful, and so above everybody else that he doesn't have to follow the laws of society. So this is something else that is adding to his choices to make these very destructive crimes. Urges, yes, absolutely. These are sexually motivated crimes, and he's following urges. His urges just happen to be very destructive. But you don't have to do all these things about, like, making yourself food and then going back to assault the victim again. And also, you don't have to use the home invasion element if you're just only set on targeting young girls for sex. There would be so many other ways to do that. Abducting somebody on the side of the road, or picking up somebody after school. I mean, they're luring somebody to a vehicle. This person is a home invader, and I do think it is trying to take over somebody else's castle. It's about the domination of it. It is a sexual issue, but it's also a power issue. And there's a website out there called whoismrcruel.com, and their subtitle is Website Dedicated to Unmasking the Melbourne Child Killer Mr. Cruel. And they have a profile here that I would like to read off. I hope you visit this website, by the way. While we do not know yet Mr. Cruel's name, there is plenty of info that we do know that is based on the physical evidence he left and the eyewitness accounts and his victims. Forensic knowledge. The perpetrator in these attacks went to great lengths to avoid leaving behind any forensic evidence that detectives could use to catch him. It has therefore been suggested that perhaps he had some level of forensic knowledge. As we said, maybe he's a police officer. I don't know if it's fair to say that he was a member of an anti-burglary task force. That is something so precise. but maybe someone who worked in law enforcement, or maybe even someone a little bit higher up in some type of intelligence agency. The following bullet points include some of the reasons why certain commentators believe that to be the case. He bathed 2 victims and wiped down the sinks and bench tops to remove fingerprints, dumped a victim in garbage bags. That was actually one of the surviving victims. Made the victims brush their teeth and clean their nails, left no DNA at crime scenes or on victims, and told Nicola Linus he will be taken to the hospital and they will examine you. You'll be examined by a police surgeon. They'll be looking for evidence to link me to you, and they won't find anything. This is a multi-part method that he has here. Firstly, about getting victims to brush their teeth and getting victims to have their nails clipped and saying that you won't find anything there. Firstly, that's a taunt. I mean, that is something they're just bragging. Yes, I did this horrible thing to you and they won't catch me. But about brushing the teeth and clipping the nails, it also makes the victim feel just a little bit better, and it puts them in just a slighter state of ease so that he can escape without leaving them in some type of extreme distress that could draw attention after he escaped. Like, imagine someone leaving a house and then someone is just causing an enormous amount of noise, or they chase after him, and then that also draws attention to him, then he would be captured. But like by getting them to cut their nails and brush their teeth, and it makes them feel cleaner. I mean, other victims have been forced to shower by their assailants. It's not unheard of in the true crime world. Now, the next line here. It is believed that the perpetrator had access to a property which was under 1 or 2 main flight paths during the Tullamarine Airport, Tullmarine, Tullamarine Airport. Oh, yes, multiple victims did say that they had heard planes flying over top. Both Sharon Wills and Nicola Linus heard planes landing in captivity, while they were in captivity, an investigation into flights and operations that the day determined was likely the location as either the Tullamarine East or North-South flight paths. So, I mean, it could be somebody who is in the Australian equivalent of the Air Force, perhaps, but also maybe just someone who has been previous law enforcement, some type of connection to the airport. Maybe he just had a room there that he used, so that really is not much to go on, but that's something. The person known as Mr. Cruel followed media about his crimes. He watched the Linus press conference and spoke to her about it, saying, "Think you're worth $25,000, went out to buy the Sun and seemed to enjoy the stories about his crimes and parallels being drawn to other abductions." There's no source provided for this info here, but I would definitely expect a lot of that behavior because when people commit these types of crimes, they have that expectation that it's going to make people feel bad, and to a psychopath or a sociopath, that fuels their excitement. He videotaped his victims. Sharon saw a tripod in front of the bed that she was held in. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he did indeed do that, and maybe that was simply something like that Carmen Chan had pointed out, that she had recognized some type of logo, she had recognized some type of material in his room, and she had something that could have shared Mr. Cruel's identity, and that's why she was murdered. And then the next one is the lifestyle. He slept in until 10 a.m. during the Linus attack. He was unshaven during the Lower Plenty attack, which only I expect they mean that they could see his beard or his, let's just say that his facial hair was coming through that single slot ski mask. And he only attacked in or leading up to school holidays. Right, the Lower Plenty attack did not occur on a school holiday, but people still think that that could be significant. He used the terms bozo, worrywart, yours, and missy to his victims. The Lower Plenty victim and Linus described his voice as deep, gruff, and uneducated. Well, I don't want to push back too much on that as someone who is somewhat of a fresh take on the subject kind of guy, But what I've heard is, in other sources, is that he was intentionally disguising his voice. His voice was described as being intentionally disguised. Why don't we say that? And with the Golden State Killer as well, they say he always spoke through clenched teeth. Now I'm speaking through clenched teeth. Like he was always talking in a way in which his voice was intentionally altered so people couldn't recognize it. And I don't really know if that would mean that he was uneducated. In fact, it seems like he was very, very much a person of above average intelligence. The Wills family described him as no accent, well spoken, fluent English, and suggested that he was an Australian. Oh, absolutely, I would think that he was an Australian, unless you mean somebody who came to Australia at a very young age, because he definitely seems like he was very familiar with the city of Melbourne. And also, there you have it, no accent. And then he also said, "You're not going to be a hero, are you?" to John Wills, think you're worth $25,000 to Nicola Linus. "Do you feel brave?" to the lure victim. Those are taunts where someone is like saying, "Don't try to be a hero. You can't overpower me, so don't even try." It's psychological manipulation. Here's something that they posted on their list here. Once again, whoismrcruel.com. He could tie knots. He used a diamond knot used by sailors, truck drivers, farmers, and fishermen. Yeah, I mean, that could be somewhat valuable in the future. And possible criminal or tactical experience. Controlled multiple adult victims in wills and lower plenty. He cut the phone lines, entered via various means, removing window panes, forcing a rollout window, and pushing a key through a lock. I mean, that sounds like someone who is part of an anti-burglary task force. I don't have anything else to go on that. And as I said, it would seem unlikely if both the Golden State Killer and Mr. Cruel had the exact same career, but just pointing that out. Evidence of planning suggests the offender spent time conducting surveillance on his victims. Cold, methodical, and calculating. The kind of person that's going to wait for 2, 3, 4 hours before he attacks. Physical appearance. Mr. Cruel went to extraordinary lengths to ensure he was not seen by his victims, and descriptions varied. The lower plenty description was mid-20s Australian, slim to medium build, grayish-white hair with white spots in it. I mean, mid-20s and grayish to white hair? That is possible, but not super common. Unshaven with a couple days' growth. Oval face, soft hands, possibly right-handed, wearing denim jeans and a close-fitting brown tweed sports jacket. That's really quite odd. Maybe those were just things he got from a thrift store, though, the way they're talking about it. The Wills attack. Australian, 173 to 180 meters tall, medium build, either had a mustache or whiskers, probably beard growth, age mid-20s to 30s. Linus attack. Just under 170 centimeters. Wow, listen to that right there. Listen to that. 173 to 180 in the Wills attack. Under 170 centimeters? What's going on with that? Though Nicola's sister estimated that he was 182 centimeters tall. Well, which one is it, people? Well built, slightly big stomach, like a beer belly, no body odor, hands felt very rough, and shortish fingernails. Arms were quite solid, stocky with fine hair, and that he had fine hair on his chest, no hair on his back. FBI profile of Mr. Cruel, April 24th, 1991. The FBI provided the following profile of Mr. Cruel to the Victoria Police. He may work or reside in proximity to his first and last known attacks, Lower Plenty and Templestowe. He is likely to be employed with a school due to the use of school uniforms, timing in school holidays, it says. Well, as we said, though, this could just be somebody who has the sense to know that when school is not in session, kids are going to be at home. He will have kept homemade pornography, including his victims. And I would like to go back to this school thing. I mean, even if some crimes are occurring in the morning, like one of those crimes occurred at 4 o'clock in the morning, school day or not a school day, someone would know that people are going to be in their homes, and they're also going to not be thinking too much about getting up for work in the morning. I think that someone is going to be trying to commit a crime. Regardless of that, that might be something that is blown out of proportion. He will have kept homemade pornography, including that of his victims. Well, as we said, if she saw the tripod, that could mean something. He is a functional individual with steady employment, generally regarded as a good neighbor, polite, quiet, sometimes introverted, and may be involved in community projects. Now, wait a second. Wait 1 second there, FBI. I say this because I was just looking at a meme on Facebook that somebody had posted, and it said, anytime you watch a serial killer documentary, it says that the guy was quiet and a loner, spent all of his time alone, just like you. And people were sharing some stuff in the comments section listing every serial killer they could think of that did not spend all of his time alone. And they're talking about people like Ted Bundy, and they were involved with these community projects. Like Ted Bundy was in local politics. John Wayne Gacy was also in local politics. He would do all of those things like the 4th of July party. And yes, serial killers go out and interact with other people. Herb Baumeister, the I-70 stringer, loved to go to gay bars. That's how he met his victims. They are very outgoing individuals, and I definitely don't I definitely don't accept, I don't know why that word was so hard to say, this whole idea that serial killers spend all of their time alone and that they're just coming across as this type of antisocial, introverted, nice guy. It really could be quite to the contrary. They'll come across as very harmless, no matter who they are. However, with the Golden State Killer, if we haven't mentioned him enough, he was known to break out into fits of rage from time to time. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, also known to break out of fits of rage from time to time. He even once started smashing somebody else's property with an axe because he thought he could get away with it, or at the very least he was mad about something. Kaczynski was a little bit deranged. Most of them are. If he has a partner, they will have been away during the time of his attacks and will know of his sexual dysfunctions, use of pornography, and schoolgirl uniforms. Many serial killers are married, and most of the ones that I had just listed off there, they had spouses, whether it's Bundy. Bundy got married later, of course, but Herb Baumeister was married the entire time. John Wayne Gacy had 2 wives, both married for 4 years. His marriages both lasted 4 years, I meant. And Kaczynski, I don't think so. But those around him may have noticed changes in behaviors during or after the attacks, including uncharacteristic use of alcohol, interest in religion, missing work, or appearing distant and preoccupied. All right, FBI, we're in 100% agreement there. I don't think I would challenge any of those, including uncharacteristic use of alcohol, interest in religion, missing work, or appearing distant and preoccupied. I think that is a very good point right there. So the point is that this type of profiling isn't an exact science, it's not perfect, but they did bring up some very, very good points. I do think that everything they said might have a possibility of being true. They might have some type of really warm lead in conducting a psychological profile. I would just share one more thing that I had read on another source. I can't remember which one, or else I would cite it for you. But they said if Mr. Cruel is interacting with people in his daily life, he is probably the nicest guy you've ever met. And we do hear stories like that. Like we were just talking about the ghost of Highway 20 recently, and the serial killer John Arthur Ackroyd, and somebody got into his car and he raped her, and she wasn't murdered. She was able to live and tell her story. But she just said there wasn't a single threatening thing about him. I definitely think that Mr. Cruel would come across as somebody who was harmless and not going to cause any trouble. But the nicest guy that you've ever met, I think that that is a little bit too extreme, because serial killers can often come across as just very cold. And here's something they also say, though, after one of these shootings. He was a very private person, rather than being quiet so much. Oh yeah, he'll talk about things, but he's not sharing the true emotions that he is experiencing. It's more about privacy as opposed to extroversion or introversion. So that's just something to say there. And maybe you would be dealing with someone who is a little bit angry from time to time, who is going to break out in fits of rage. Someone who has very superficial charm, and obviously superficial, but maybe they are correct in saying that it's someone that you wouldn't think twice about. Yeah, he's a nice guy, but, wait, what was his name again? That kind of person. I'm fully aware that it's entirely possible that the FBI's profile is 100% correct. I just wanted to raise a few things that I had questions about. What do you think happened with the story of Mr. Cruel? Do you think that it's normal for someone to commit 4 sexually motivated crimes and then just stop? Or do you think that he committed many more of these non-canonical attacks? They said up to 12. I mean, what do you think happened with everyone? And I would ask you a challenge question. Why do you believe that Carmen Chan was murdered and the other victims were not? Do you think Mr. Cruel actually committed that crime? Or do you think that this was a case of she learned something about his identity? Maybe she recognized something about his camera tripod. I've seen that before. Or do you think that she pulled off his ski mask for a second? What do you have to say about anything? Please put your ideas in the comments section below. One more time, this was a topic requested by one of the listeners, so you can put your requests in the comments section. Also, writing me at BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box. I have a page for the show, though, Black Box Online Radio on Facebook. And there are always other places to find the show, like Instagram, BlackBoxNid88 over there, and that's where I will see you for the bonus podcast. Until next time.